And welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons notched up a big win against a team that has monstered us for decades. We are now 7-2 with a very healthy percentage as we once again take the big stage in a massive test, in a top four clash, in a true 8-point game against Port Adelaide on Friday night. George is still on leave for another few weeks, but fear not, I am joined once again tonight by Positive Binners. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. If you're listening in, where is he now? The south of France, or
I'm not too sure.
I just made that bit up. Maritz or came to my mind, or some such. And good evening, Demonlanders.
How are you? You're good.
Yes, and yeah, that was I watched the game up the top of the Ponsford for the first time since I went up there halfway through the second half of the Brisbane semi in the finals last year to see if I could change our fortunes last year. But so it was fantastic to be up the top of the Ponsford again, and you really, really do get a sense of the game in a different way from watching it on the wing. And we've talked about this a few times over the last couple of years, but I'm always curious. The coaches have always been on the wing in footy, and as long as I can remember. But the behind the goal shots are the ones that the club look at predominantly when they're doing their video reviews, and I've often wondered whether the coaches wouldn't be better served sitting at looking down the ground. A bit of the sort of pushback on that idea is it's a long way to the other end of the ground to be able to see it. So,
well, there's that, and as well, because they sit on the wing, that's probably why they then watch the behind the goals, because they get a different angle to what they watch the game. So maybe that's the reason why.
Yeah. I mean, it does actually give a really different perspective at the, if the game is over the other side. I've been sitting, as I've said, right on the wing above our interchange bench. If it's on the other side, it's really hard to see that far, obviously, but it's really very difficult to see the sort of structure. And up the top of the Ponsford, it's really amazing to watch, both teams, but predominantly Melbourne, obviously, because that's what I'm watching, that flow of players back and forward as the ball moves up and down the ground and the positioning. And I got a much stronger sense or a reminder of that structural. And there's a really good question about the defense from D4, and it's interesting having watched it, because there's a huge amount of pointing going on, and keeping that structure is a sort of constant sort of pull and push and pull between the various players. But I really noticed Gus is very demonstrative, and Lever, and making sure everyone's in the right. They must reference each other in terms of the distance they are from each other and those sorts of things. So. It was great to be up there and have that angle again, and felt like going home.
Well, I was sitting behind the goals on the bottom level with, along with most other Melbourne supporters. I must say I hate that aspect. I'm used to being sort of on the half-forward flank wing, one level up. I really love that aspect to view the game. But you're right. You do get to see certain things that you don't normally see from that thing. And particularly with our back line, you sort of see them pointing at each other and directing each other, and May and Lever sort of telling the McVees and Rivers and so where to stand. Or I saw Jake Lever really let Rivers know at one of the ball-ins to look after Bruce, to make sure that they're, a ball-in in the forward pocket, that you've really got to keep your eye on Bruce. Don't let him, get an inch, because he'll punish you. But it's good to sort of see that type of stuff. It's something I probably wouldn't notice in my normal seats. So, yeah, that was good to see.
You need to be up high, though, I think, to get the full advantage of that down the ground shot, if just in terms of seeing how the structure is. But, it's great being down on the ground level because that's the only spot you can hear them talking to each other, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I was row FF, so I was quite far back. Well, let's hear our reviews. Each week, I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcast or their preferred podcasting app. We love the feedback and we'll read them out on the show. G. Marrows writes, essential listening as a D supporter. It's a grand old time to be a long-standing Demon fan. The Demonland podcast is the perfect way to unpack the strategies, ups and downs of games and players. Essential listening for anyone who watches D's games. Thanks for the pod. Well, thank you, G. Marrows. That's exactly the feedback we like. From Luann on our Facebook page. Honestly, this is my fave midweek entertainment. Thanks for all your time, Andy, Binman and George. Well, thank you, Luann. It's very kind of you. That feedback was actually posted in the comments section of last week's episode on Facebook. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week on that platform or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up and you can chat with other D's fans. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there are multiple topics and threads on all things Demons related. So sign up to join in on the conversation. I assure you, it's far superior to anything you'll read on social media. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. I'll answer, put you on mute. We'll bring you on when we can. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, we'll play it on the show. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room by simply heading over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday at 8:30 p.m. If you've downloaded this podcast, you want to listen to us live, then join us on Mondays at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com. Just a bit of housekeeping. I know that I just said we're live every Monday, but next week we'll be live on Tuesday. I'm interstate this weekend for a wedding and I'll be traveling on the Monday. Won't have time to adequately prepare for the podcast and I like to be prepared. So Tuesday it is next week only and then I think we'll be back to Monday nights except probably after Queen's or King's birthday.
Dissecting the rounds match from the depths of the game that was, it's over to Andy, Binman and George with the match wrap-up.
The D's pressure game in the opening 10 minutes of the match was off the charts. Our usually exemplary kicking for goal, which has been a hallmark of our 2023 so far, was way off the mark as we banged on 5 behinds in that period of time. And indeed, we had 9 inside 50s before Charlie Spargo kicked our first major for the match. Thereafter, we straightened up, slotting through 4 more goals going into the first break with our opponents only managing a solitary point. We added another goal in the second term before conceding the only goal for the half, which, if I'm honest, was a clear push in the back on May. The lead at the main break was 45 points. The D's looked as if they would pile on a massive score from then on and win by a huge margin as they kept the Hawks to their lowest halftime score since 1960. Harry Petty had a huge first half and looked to be finally playing his breakout game as a forward, a role Coach Simon Goodwin has stated will be persisted with, but supporters had to have been content with 2 goals, 6 marks, and some great work as a true centre forward up the wings before he was subbed out of the game with a bruised foot that now sees him out of the team to take on the Power next week, and he'll also be missing for the next 4 to 6 weeks. The Hawks came out in the third term full of energy. It was their turn to exert the pressure. They won all the clearances, forced errors, and kicked 3 goals in 3 minutes that restarted proceedings. The Demons became a little sloppy with their play and momentarily lost momentum, but we took a deep breath, accepted the challenge with a couple of quick goals. Yet the Hawks kept coming, but the D's had the answers, and by the end of the term was still in full control with a 35-point lead. And the Demons are developing a very special attacking division that relies not only on one individual, but rather on spreading the load among many. This week, 12 players shared the goal-kicking spoils for our 4th win. Every time we've had at least 10 different goal kickers for the match. And according to our mate Andrew Whelan at Wheelo Ratings, we are equal 5th in the highest average goal scorers per match in the first 9 matches of a season. Collingwood in 2011 averaged 10.4. The Bulldogs in 2008, 10.3. Geelong in 99 and 2000, 10.2. And the D's with 5 other teams have averaged 10.1 goal scorers in the first 9 rounds of a season. And it was our Rolls-Royce champion midfielders, Clayton Oliver, 34 disposals, Jack Viney, 31, and Christian Petracca, 30, who were instrumental in the win. The Demons more than doubled the Hawks' score, won the inside 50 count by 66-41, outmarked them 105-71, won the hitouts 38-23, and the contested possessions 147-135. We did, however, get pipped at the clearances on the day, 33-32. At the final siren, we boosted our percentage with a 54-point win. It is our 5th 50-plus win in 9 games. In 2021, during the whole season, including the massive wins in the preliminary and grand finals, we only won 4 games by more than 50 points. And last year, we also only managed 4 wins over 50 points. So we've already exceeded that. And I don't need to remind listeners to this podcast that at the beginning of the season, many in the media put a big question mark on our forward line and our ability to kick big scores. And we're currently the highest scoring team in the competition. Man, what are some of your thoughts on the game?
Well, I was going to have a bit of rant about the general criticism and negativity about the win, and
you thought I was going to be critical that we didn't win by more.
I did,
and I am, but I held back.
Good, because I was ready to launch. But I thought, well, I don't want to be Captain Grumpy like last week, and bang on about the unrealistic expectations of fans. I mean, just as you pointed out, I mean, what was that last stat you said about the 54 point? Above 50
this points? Year we've won 5 games in 9 rounds. We've won 5 games by 50 plus points. So 2021 and 2022, for the entire season, including the finals in 2021, only 4 times in both those seasons for the 25 matches that we played, or 26.
I mean, what I would say is it wasn't a great watch after quarter time, really. How I would describe the win is a professional win, a top club coming up against a bottom club. We were professional. What was really impressive for me is exactly as you suggested in that first quarter, we really, really brought the heat. And with 10 minutes to go in that quarter, I watched the replay, and it came up with a graphic on the Fox coverage that with I think 9 minutes 30 or something to go on the clock. Our pressure rating was 230. I mean, theirs was okay too. And, I'll touch on this in the stat section, but theirs was north of 180. So it wasn't as if they, didn't bring the effort completely. It was, and again, I'll talk in this in the stats, but it was interesting seeing those numbers to actually, give me a better sense of what they brought to the table, the Hawks brought to the table. But just on that Dunstall, I can't believe people are paid to talk about football and are closed so clearly, don't do any research or don't, he mentioned when that graphic came up, he said 230. Wow, that's an amazing, score. Remember, 200 is considered elite. So 230 is, I thought that was super impressive because it showed we attacked the game in the right attitude. And really, that's what it felt like at the game. But he said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing here, that, that's really impressive for a team not, well known for their pressure this season. We're just like, what are you talking about? And then, that was 5 minutes after Gary Lyon had been asked, to give some assessment of Petty's kicking for goal, and he couldn't answer the question. I was saying, have you not been watching him this season? He's a fantastic kick for goal. He's neat. He's only got a short run up. There's a few moving parts. So, but yeah, I thought the pressure was super impressive in that, particularly in that first 20 minutes, because we ended up 183 or something for the for that first quarter. 210 we ended up for that first quarter, which is huge. So we dropped off a touch in that last 10 minutes of that quarter. But 210 for that full quarter of pressure is incredible. And, it really felt like that. It was, so I think the second half, and even perhaps from that first quarter, certainly my sense, but others' senses of the game was somewhat coloured by how we were in that first quarter. mean, football's not really so linear like that, you're leading by 30 at quarter time, you're going to be winning by 120. So, I thought that first quarter was fantastic. And rather than being negative, Nancy, and going into the sort of pushing back against the critique of another 50-plus point win, I thought I've been really enjoying the presses this year of, in particular, Hardwick, the two Scott brothers, Goody, and Mitchell. He's really interesting to listen to post-match presser, and he's really quite reflective and remarkably calm. So it probably augurs well for his career as a senior coach. So rather than sort of giving that spiel, I thought I'd ask you to play a clip of Mitchell talking about the Mighty D's.
Yeah, we touched on it briefly after the game, but what did you notice about them and, the standards that Melbourne drive? And when when they made a change to their game, every player in their group knew what to do, and if someone went away from it, they were really hard on each other. And they're a group that have been together for a long time. I think Goody's done a great job of getting them to get the best out of themselves over the last few years, and I think that they play a really sustainable brand of footy. They're really good in the contest, they're good all over the ground, really well set up defensively, and they're finding ways to score every week now. So they're a finished product of a group, and they're just trying to sustain that for as long as they can. And talk to our group really about took them a long time to get there, and we're at the early phase of that. And that's the type of side, when you play against Hawthorn in years to come, you want to be knowing that you're coming up against a side that has all aspects of the game covered, because they've been doing it for a long time together.
Great comment, I reckon. I really enjoyed that. It's a really snappy summary of where we're at as a club, and just in that sort of, space around maybe we should have won by 100 or whatever, is that it's a really good reminder what he's saying about how long a journey it takes to get to this point where you're a team that is, pushing for a flag and in that top four in the competition. It wasn't that long ago we were in exactly the situation Hawthorn are in now, and it's a building process that has been a long time coming. So I, for one, there's no way that I'm going to not enjoy a 54-point win against a team that, pretty much throughout my football life of being a fan, they've just been they've been our nemesis, really, haven't they? So many horrible matches where Hawthorn have beaten us in, of course, in the 87 prelim, that still burns. So, anytime we touch up the Hawks by 50 points plus is a good day from my perspective.
Yeah, I think I mentioned on the podcast earlier in the year, either on the podcast or on Demonland, when I was in 1988 when we lost the grand final, I'd painted my face and it had rained all day. We were out in the open and the paint was leaving the ground, the paint streaming down my face. I don't know if I had tears in my eyes, and a fully grown Hawthorn supporter, a fully grown man, laughed in my face. He was probably pissed off his head. He laughed in my face at my misfortune with the paint and all that. So after this game, I sort of went around and teased a few kids just to make myself feel better and to scar someone else like I've been scarred. No, I didn't.
Well, that's good. That's lifelong trauma. Well, I put on Demonland this week. I remember, I can't remember if it was in Goody's first year. You're good with this stuff, so maybe you'll remember, or it was in his second year. But we hadn't beaten Hawthorn for about 12 matches.
2016, was it?
Yeah, I think so. It must have been 16. It was while Goody, so Ruse was
maybe
still coaching,
Ruse was
so
still
his
coaching,
final season. And I was watching a game, when we finally broke that drought, and I was pretty vocal and cock a hoop at the footy, and there was a Hawks fan there, and he looked like an accountant. He looked like a stereotypical Hawks fan, and but he took umbrage at my enthusiasm for the D's and was bouncing back at me all day. And when it became obvious that we were going to win that game, and I got increasingly vocal, he got into me and was talking about, well, this is your final. This is, enjoy this because you won't see finals, and it's a pity you'll never meet us in the finals, yada, yada, yada. And from that point, the two clubs have gone in completely opposite directions. And so, again, I just... Well,
it turns out we did meet them in the finals in 2018, and kick them out of the final. So
Yeah,
I hope he was
absolutely.
remembering that comment that he made to you. And
Yes.
but he's right now. He's right, because we won't meet them in finals. Well, certainly not in the next
No.
5 to 10 years, hopefully.
Some of the numbers are spooky. Some can't be explained by conventional means. But that won't stop the boys from trying. Coming up now, it's the Demonland Stats File.
Binman, what do you have for us on this week's stats file?
Well, I am going to play it straight this week and just no editorializing about the lack of stats and such like, though I will point out that I still haven't cracked the fitness conundrum, and I'm getting sick of people calling the Pies by far the fittest team in the AFL. I'd love to, if we can get Selwyn Griffith back on, we could just talk about Collingwood because we won another last quarter. So, any stats fans out there, if you could tell us when the last time a team, what's the longest streak for most final quarters won? So that's 9 now. That's an impressive number, really. By any way you slice that up, that's impressive. But so this week I thought I'd just go to our core stats and speak to them. So our pressure rating, as we talked before, 9.5 minutes to go in that first quarter. It was off the charts at 2:30. They should just put that. They should just put a little not recordable after a certain point. It's 11 on the scale of the Marshall amp. So 210 in that first quarter to 188, which was really impressive by the Hawks as well. I thought I was surprised when I saw that number. Second quarter is interesting because the eyes really, how it felt in the game is reflected in these numbers. Our pressure dropped down to 158 and they were 153. They got a bake at quarter time, at halftime, I should say, and they came out terrific in that third quarter, got a few goals on the bounce, and their pressure was 194 to our 183 in that quarter. And again, the eyes told the tale, didn't it? And then we righted the ship, and I think Goody would have been really happy the fact that that game didn't just drift away. At that point, it was looking likely that they might even bring it down to a 4 or 5 goal win if they kept their momentum from the third, but they ran out of steam a bit and we kept on running on top of the ground. And our pressure in that last quarter was the second highest for the whole game for us, 185 to 167. So I thought that was a really good sign for both our fitness but also our ability to switch back on. The overall pressure rating for the game was 184, so a touch above AFL average, and they were 175, so we won that. The pressure points for individual players, and just a reminder, so the pressure points are the weighed sum of pressure acts for individual players. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75 points, closing acts are worth 2.25, chasing acts are 1.5, and corralling are 1.2. And thanks again for Wheelo ratings for these stats that I've cut and pasted from the Demonland Forum. So topping the charts was surprised me, actually, was Sparrow, not because it surprised me of his pressure, but that he was right up there. He's such a physical player, isn't he? Pickett was next on 65. Viney, who I thought would be number one because he was just a bull at a gate the whole game, was 59. Nibbler 50. Petracca 47. Oliver 43. Grundy, Chandler, and Lever. Time in forward half, big stat for us, 56-44. It was something like 65-35. It might have even been 70-30 after the first quarter. So it evened up significantly after that. Contested possessions, another critical number for us. 147 our way, 133 for them. It was pretty much break even after quarter time. I tried to find out, couldn't, what the numbers were at quarter time. But I think I remember saying at the footy it was something like 12-13 at the 5 minutes to go in that first quarter. So pretty much break even after that, which is probably reflected in those pressure numbers I gave before. The turnover stats, keeping in mind that they're 18th in this stat, so in differential from scores from turnover, the Hawks are 18th, so just sort of context for that. But nonetheless, We scored 80 points from turnover, a full 58 points more than the Hawks, which is our best differential in that stat for this season so far. Another one important stat for us, obviously, is metres gained. So we had nearly 800 more than them, with just a touch over 6,000 metres gained for us. And just some key, because obviously the first quarter is what set up the whole game for us. Some key first quarter stats is this sort of touches on that discussion last week about clearances. They actually won the pre-clearance ground ball 8-6 in the opening term, and centre bounce clearances 3-2 in that term. However, after the clearance, we out-hunted the Hawks and we won the ground ball We won the post-clearance contested possessions 22-14 in that quarter. So we really, combined that with the 210 pressure rating, and it really shows the heat that we brought in that first quarter. So, to be honest, it's no surprise that the Hawks couldn't manage or couldn't deal with that sort of pressure. Just on our forward line working well, you mentioned the 12 different goals, the average of 10, I think 10.1 per game goal scorers, which is the equal fifth most ever after 9 rounds, as you mentioned. But I think as interesting as that is that it's the most after 9 rounds for 12 years. And so for me, in some ways, that's more sort of valuable because the game's a lot different than it
changed.
Was. Yeah, right. So that, I think if if you're comparing to the last few years, it's where clearly, that's high. And I think that's a high number. And that speaks to what we were talking about last week, again, around that experimentation and looking for different options and looking for a different way to score. So you mentioned how effective we are. We're ranked number 1 for attack in the AFL. People this time last year were lamenting how poor we were in attack. And I can't remember off the top of my head what our number was, but I would be guessing we were middle of the table for that stat after, 9-10 rounds last season, number 1 now. And this one really jumped out for me for a stat is we set a new season best 20 marks inside 50. We 66-41 inside 50s, which is completely, that's another important stat for Melbourne. I should have said before, but that's a smashing. But it was crazy. It was like something, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was something like, I think we were 25 up at some point early in the game. They had a phenomenally low number of inside 50s in that first quarter. And from those 21 marks inside 50, we scored 9-4, 58 points from the from the shots at goal from the marks, which is super impressive, isn't it? So 21 marks inside 50 for a match. I'm not sure where that ranks for us. It's certainly the most this season. I'm not sure where historically that ranks, but it's pretty high. And to get nearly 10 goals from marks inside 50 is just fantastic.
Any other stats?
No. That's I think a comprehensive, combined with yours. I think we've covered all of the key stats today.
I think we have.
We've all got opinions and we've all got our own thoughts, but we like to get another take on it. You can get your questions and say through on 039016 3666 and via demonland.com. It's time to hear from you with your listener questions on the Demonland podcast.
That's right. Each week we ask Demonlanders to post their questions and comments in that week's podcast thread on demonland.com, and we always read them out. We answer them on the show. If you are just a listener of the podcast and you aren't a member of Demonland, then what are you waiting for? Head on over to demonland.com, sign up, join in on the conversations. If you really want to ask a question but aren't on Demonland, shoot us an email at demonland@demonland.com with the subject questions for the podcast. You can also leave us a voicemail at 039016 3666, 039016 3666. Don't worry, nobody answers, so you don't have to talk to anybody. Unfortunately, Skype doesn't allow for a custom voice greeting, as I just found out, and you'll just hear a generic greeting, so just wait for the beep and leave your question. If you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, then just slide into our DMs and ask your questions there. We'll keep your real name anonymous if you wish. Pew 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 asks, can we take anything away from a game like this against an opposition like Hawthorn? So, big man, is there anything you can take away from a game like the one on the weekend, or do we just take it for what it was, the experimentation aspect of rolling more players through the middle, giving Petty and JVR more time to develop as key forwards? What can you take away from games where your opposition sort of just isn't quite there?
Well, for the first comment I'd make is similar to the Suns game in a little way that, to a degree, and perhaps the North game as well, is that there's a real risk of underestimating the opponents. So, Hawthorn are down near the bottom, but they, it depends how much stock you put in those pressure numbers as indicative of effort, but their effort was there. If you think those are meaningful stats, it was 182 or whatever said before. So I think that I think we should avoid the risk, avoid the trap of thinking that we're not playing an opponent. So that'd be my first comment. My second comment would be that there's heaps to take away from it. And in the Goodies presser, I'll touch on this a bit later. But what did he take away? He emphasised how significant their defensive effort was. He said that it's not going to be possible in AFL to keep a team from scoring, but they only scored 1 goal to half time. And that was really before the dew set in. So, the best conditions, if you weren't at the ground and watching on telly, it was super, super dewy in that second half. You could just feel the fog in the air and that's to be honest, I think that's one of the issues that we do have. We seem to fumble in dewy, slippery, humid conditions. We can't do dew, we can't do humidity.
More so than other teams, because I don't think they had the same problems as we did. But anyway.
Well, there is and the other thing I was going to say is the risk of confirmation bias. So that's an interesting comment because, interestingly, Mitchell in his presser made a point of saying how much better they handled the conditions than us, and said, look, you've got the players of the quality of Petracca and we struggled and turned it all over and fumbled. So if you ask the senior coach of the team we just played, he would say we handled those conditions better. If you ask a Melbourne fan, we might say, well, no, we were terrible. So, I think there's that risk. So what can we take away from it? We can definitely take away from it how well Petty played, and we'll speak about him in more detail later. The critical thing, though, is the defence because, and again, this is something that we'll touch on, but the 1 goal to half-time for the opposition in AFL footy, doesn't matter how bad they are, is just incredibly impressive. So, I think their defence is really a work in progress, and he was super thrilled about that. Asked about the game, he immediately went to the defence. I mean, he was asked about, if that was a focus, but that was a real focus of his press conference, Goody. So, there were some other I think some other real positives to take away. The number one thing for me was that first quarter, getting to 230 in the 20-minute mark of the first quarter, finishing 210 for that quarter tells me that their attitude is spot on. They came into that match. There was no chance that was going to be one of those matches that we lost because we came in with a poor attitude. And that's what you really want to see, that their head's in the right space and that their attitude. Again, if we think back to last year, we were had we won 8 straight, weren't we, or 9 straight?
9 straight. We won the first 10 games.
And so, but still, people were with good reason, a bit worried about our intensity and our pressure and our focus. Although we've lost 2 more games this season than we had last year at the corresponding stage, no one could really, criticise our effort or pressure, except in the, probably the 2 losses, to be honest. So, heaps to take away from it. There's got player. I thought Cozzie's pressure was fantastic to get, his pressure numbers back up there. Personally, I think Sparrow just goes from strength to strength every week. I thought he was really impressive. Petty was really impressive up till coming off. His marking was fantastic, really.
And his work up the ground as well. We were the last few weeks I've been critical of our forwards not sort of doing what T-Mac and Ben Brown do along the wings, and he was sort of getting up there and taking marks there. So I was impressed with that. It's a pity he's not going to be there for
Sparks back in the team. There was heaps to take away. There's always something to take away from a win. There's no such thing as a game of no value. And but the main thing for me, the takeaway is what Goody was saying is they're retooling their defensive system live. We're watching it, and so. Yes, it was against a team that struggles transitioning the ball from the back half, so that's helpful for us. And yes, they turned it over, but of course that's a function, at least partly, of our intense pressure that we put on them. So heaps to take away from it. I thought Gorney looked better up forward. That was another thing that worked for me. But the big one for me was the continuing form of Rivers. I just think he's growing week on week. Probably finally, speaking of Rivers, the other big thing for me to take away is, as we've talked about many times, is a big weakness for us is our ability to win ground ball in defence. And Rivers, in his post-match interview on the Melbourne Footy Club website, he when asked about it, he emphasised that was an impressive performance in terms of keeping their dangerous small forwards down. So, I think Wingard's a very inconsistent player, but he's exactly the sort of player we struggle with. And McVie was on him pretty tight for the whole game, which is exactly what, we need to have that sort of player. So I think when Salem comes back into this team, it will really allow McVie to focus on that role. And so we also kept Impey out of the game. They couldn't. We beat him in ground balls, as I said in before. In post clearance possessions, we won. So from that perspective, defensively, it was very impressive, and I thought it was interesting that's what Rivers spoke to at length in his interview.
Red Jacket adds to the previous question. Further to this, what can we take away from the first 9 games of the season, considering who we've played and who we've lost to? The only top 8 team we've beaten this season is Western Bulldogs, and that was in the first game of the season when the Bulldogs didn't have their act together. We lost to Brisbane, currently 3rd, and Essendon, currently 10th, when the Bombers were up and about. We've also then beaten 11th, 13th, 16th, 17th and 18th. Obviously, the real test comes in the next 5 to 6 weeks when we play 4th, 12th, 9th, 1st and 7th. And before you answer that, we do have a voicemail that asks a similar question.
Boys, first time caller. Just have a question regarding where do you think we're really at? 7-2. What would you even say our best victory is so far? Bulldogs, Gold Coast away. It's hard to really have a clear line of if we're any good. I think there's a lot of talk around the club and that we're flying, and we're on the way with another flag, and it's us and Brisbane and Collingwood. But for me, we haven't really beat anyone. The 2 teams we've played in any sort of form, being Essendon and Brisbane, we've lost to. So I don't really see the hype. I wouldn't be surprised if we go to Port Adelaide and get whipped. I don't think Freo, who are starting to get a little bit of form, will be that easy a game at the G. And then we've got 2 really tough outs with Carlton and Collingwood. What do you guys think? Are we the shittiest team to be 7-2, or actually are we any good? Thanks. Bye.
B-Man,
are we the shittiest team to be 7-2? I know you're going to say no. So where
I'm just
we
going to my stats collection here. I'll just go, I'll Google shittiest teams for 7-2. Look, I mean, I'm not quite sure how to respond. I think it's a bit of a non-argument about who have you beaten. I mean, 9 games into the season is a pretty good sample size. We've got a ladder. We're second on the ladder. We're 16 or 15 points clear on percentage from everyone's darlings, the Pies, the so-called, unbeatable Pies. So we've had a slightly easier draw than them, but not almost identical. So now that we played Richmond and we've played North Melbourne and Hawks, whereas they haven't played them. So that's a bit of a percentage boost coming for them. But, we're in terrific shape. I mean, like I talked about our forward line structure. We're the best attacking side in the AFL. It's not 2 or 3 games in of the season, and you can start getting ahead of yourself, like the Saints, perhaps, like Essendon, like the teams. But, that front half of the first handful of games of the season were, using a political term, they were gerrymandered by the AFL to make sure that Essendon and St Kilda had the best chance of having a decent start to the season. But both teams are struggling. Well, Saints lost on the weekend to Adelaide. Geelong got beaten by Richmond. Brisbane have had their travails. So you can only go by the ladder. And we're in a competition with 17 other teams. Who have we beaten? Well, it's a bit of a for me, it doesn't hold much weight, that sort of argument, because maybe after 2 or 3 rounds it does. Sure, I'm looking forward, like everyone else, to see us playing against Collingwood. Unfortunately, we play Cats at Geelong. For me, it's impossible really to get a proper bead on that, that performance or weighting that performance, because it's down at Cardinia Park. We played Brisbane. That we talked about that after the game. For me, that's a mulligan. But I'm pretty confident that we've got Brisbane's measure, though I think Brisbane are much, much better shape this year than previously. And outside of that, there's Collingwood. So for me personally, it's Melbourne, Collingwood, Geelong, and Brisbane. And this is my view. I think there's a pretty big gap back to the rest of the competition. So I don't buy into this notion that there's 8 teams who can win the flag. And I personally think Collingwood are overrated. And so, for me, those 4 teams are the genuine premiership contenders. We're one of them. Again, it goes back to what I was saying before, is followed Melbourne for a long time. There would be many a season. Well, in fact, every season I'd give my eye tooth for to be 7-2 after 9 rounds with a percentage of 143. The numbers don't lie. So you can turn that around and say, well, who did we beat? Other teams are better. But 9 rounds in, second on the ladder with the best percentage in the AFL, I mean, it's not a mirage.
Look, there's no doubt the next couple of weeks, the next 5-6 weeks, even going after the bye with Geelong, it will give us a better indication of where we're at. I noticed you did mention Port in your top, so we've got them coming up this week. We're going to talk more extensively about them later.
They're not a top 4 side. I don't see them as a credible threat for the flag, but that doesn't mean that we're going to win this week. We're favourites, by the way, to win this game. We're $1.68 favourites. People will go, well, that's the bookies. What would they know? They're wrong all the time, or maybe. But the fact remains that Melbourne fans have made us favourite for this game. Cold-eyed football fans have put their hard-earned money on Melbourne to win this game. Now, I won't be shocked if we get beaten. It's a hard ask to go to Adelaide at the best of times with 45,000 screaming Port fans. And I will talk about this later, but they've really improved this year, Port, and I rank them. I also rate Dogs. I think the Dogs are in pretty good shape too, but those 2 clubs are in the 5 through to 10, probably 5 through to 8 category for me. The other thing is it's incredibly long season. So we talked about this last week, is that you don't want to be perfect now. We're still experimenting. So, we're still looking at what our best setup up forward is. We're still, we've lost a couple of games we've gone into right before the game. We've lost a key senior defender, and Lever one time, and then Hibberd a couple of weeks ago. We've travelled. We've had a really, really tough travel schedule so far. What is it we've got?
Well, this will be our 6th game on the road this season. No other team has even come close. I mentioned last week we'd done 5 already after the Suns game, and no other the next closest was 4, and most had done 3 or 2 or 1.
Yes, and I think that cannot be understated, because people tend to forget that our travel schedule has been incredibly taxing. And if we go back to the interview that we did with Selwyn Griffith, he highlighted it, didn't he? He talked about the challenges that are associated with travel, the interruption for your sleep patterns, your diet.
We've also played, had played prior to this week, 12 games in 3 games in 12 days to the Suns game. So that's got to have an effect too.
And that's right. And so this week, our 10th game, so we've had an extremely tough fixture in terms of our travel and the number of games with less than a week's break. And as Selwyn Griffith said, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
This week, we've got a 6-day break travelling to Adelaide. So this will cap off a tough run. So my point being is that 7-2 at this stage, if we do win next week, will be 8-2. With that fixture, with the demanding travel, with the shortened breaks, they would have taken that every single day of the week at the beginning of the season. And what's really important is that is the back half, what happens then. So, we travel on a 6-day break, but after that we have 3 consecutive games at the G, then the bye, then we play down the Cats down in Geelong. So that means we stay in Victoria after this weekend coming up. We stay in Victoria until round 16 at the beginning of July. So 6 weeks without having to travel. The hardest part of the home and away season is now behind us. Notwithstanding the fact that we've got Collingwood still to come and Geelong still to come to play them, to really test our mettle against the other top-notch teams. But, for me, I think it's a fantastic position to be in. There'd be no club would swap it for us. Once we get through this week, we're really over the tough travel schedule, we'll be in Melbourne. And then that game, the round 16 game, is the first one we travel, and that's the Giants at Traeger Park. And there's still talk that might be in Melbourne. So that's a home game. So it's but if they don't sort out the AFL and the Northern Territory, can't come to terms, then that's going to be in Melbourne as well. So then, we'll be middle of July before we end up having to leave Victoria, which is huge in terms of its ability to help us prepare for the back end of the season.
Denox says, thanks for your effort, guys. Efforts as usual, guys. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about Clary's game and if you think there has been changes this year. He's averaging 5.2 marks this season. The last few years he has been around the 3.5 mark. This has seen him pick up a few more uncontested possessions. He has pushed his kick/handball ratio a bit higher as well. Do we see this as a deliberate change in his game? Is it about trying to break the tag/attention he gets when at the coalface? Or is this just as a result of sharing on-ball minutes with a few more players, Rivers, Cozzy, etc., resulting in him being a bit more outside? Well, Clary's kick-handball ratio has gone up significantly in the past few years. We've noticed that. It's kicking a lot more. His uncontested possessions are up by 4 on average this season compared to last year and the year before. His contested possession on average is down a fraction compared to last year and by just over 1 from 2021. So there's no real difference in his contested possessions, but his uncontested possessions has gone up by 4. And I think the uncontested possession numbers being up is as a direct result probably of him playing more minutes, not necessarily in the middle where he's sort of gone elsewhere. But Big Man, Clary?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, just for any of the podcast listeners who don't regularly go to the Demonland Footy Forum site, it's full of really, really terrific analysis and, obviously a lot of passionate fans. And so, I read it. I read it for the footy analysis because there's really so little good stuff in the media. It's got worse from my perspective. And, I say that by way of Denox's comments are spot on. It's, I think he answers the questions. I agree with what his point is. He's definitely being used differently. And I really like it because, it struck me on the weekend. He kicked, I forget who he kicked it to, but it was just a beautiful inboard kick, smart, clever kick, well weighted. And it's the sort of skill that in his first couple of seasons you didn't see that often. And he was such a meat and potato contested ball winner, high handball, the handballs around the back that didn't, the padding the stats more than doing damage on the, getting territory. It really rounds out his game, and I like him on the outside because he's surprisingly tall. He looks, in terms of one-on-one marking, and he's I agree. He's been used more as a link man as well. And when he is kicking for territory, he's a really, really penetrating kick. He, easily clears he easily clears 60 metres, doesn't he? So it's good territory. But the numbers of Petracca as well have been down on the midfield. I think it's it's the sort of thing I guess Goody can dial up. If he needs more Oliver action, then he can dial it up and give him more time directly in the middle. But I really like how Oliver's been used this season.
And we're definitely sort of saving both Oliver and Petracca and Viney. We're rotating more players through the middle, and I guarantee you that'll dial up as the season gets to the pointy end and finals. We don't want to be for those guys to have run out of steam come finals time. We want them cherry ripe, and that looks like the direction they're going in. One of the midfield setups, I think, was Brayshaw, JJ, and Nibbler, or Brayshaw, JJ, and Rivers. So it was a totally... no disrespect to them, but it was second, third string, really. And I don't think they were disrespecting the opposition. That's part of keeping our guns cherry ripe.
The other thing about being up the top of the Ponsford, as I was saying earlier, is that you really get to see the running. And at one stage I was watching Oliver run, and I forget sometimes how good a runner he is, because he always, in my mind's eye, I've still got that, inside contested bull, and it probably isn't sustainable to for him to be smashing heads, although it seems to be for Jack Viney. It seems to be sustainable for him. But he's a sneaky good athlete, Oliver. He's quicker over the ground than he looks a bit ungainly, and he's got the black boots, and but he's a much better athlete than I thought he'd ever be. That's for sure.
Von says the pressure rating plummeted in the second quarter after being huge in the first quarter. Do you think we thought let's give as little as we have to now, slow everything down and keep as fresh as possible, essentially read what they were giving and equal that? I thought our attack on the ball carrier in the first quarter was huge and was something I've been wanting to see more of recently. The way we were peeling off to get to the next possession in the chain and kill it was as good as it's been for a while. It faded as the game went on. Do you think we decided to try some other defensive tactics / structures, or just got worse at it over the duration of the game? Or did Hawthorn just make it harder for us to do that as effectively as the game went on? The quality of possession seemed to decrease as the game went on. Do we put that down to the sun going down and the dew setting in? Well, B-Man, you've spoken a lot about the pressure rating already. Is there anything else you want to add to that? And
just that I don't think it's conscious decision to sort of dial back. I don't think that that's something that they would look to do. They've not, that's not probably good from a psychological perspective. You don't practice to dial back. However, in practice, the game was a scrap in that second quarter, and I guess there's we've talked about this in the North game. There's always when you've won the game, essentially we weren't going to lose the game after that first quarter. There's such a strong connection between the psychology of the game and your intensity and your ability then to apply pressure. So I think that all of those things dropped off, and they were part of the reasons of the fumbles as well, I think, because we just weren't as mentally on the right, sharpened edge. But it's a bit like the physical stuff. Can you do that all season? It's a bit like what you were just saying about Oliver. Can you be mentally at that sort of sharpened edge all season? No, you can't. So, having said all of that, Goody said this in his presser, that he was really happy with that last quarter. Rivers said the same thing in his interview on the website. So, you can hear sometimes the theme between the players and the coaches. That would have been a discussion post-game. They ended up with their second highest pressure rating for the game in that last quarter, which says to me that, they gave him a rev up at 3/4 time and said, listen, it's not good enough. So that second quarter was a ugly watch, wasn't it? It was a dull quarter of footy, and the third quarter was a great game, a quarter of footy if you're a Hawks fan, not so good if you're a D's fan.
Nairobi Demon says, for a few weeks now, I've felt our handball decision-making has been poor and passing/receiving skills sloppy and often fumbly. The Choco kicking clinic has, for the most part, worked wonders. Do we need a Choco handballing clinic? Well, I've always thought we've been poor at handballing. I think we either bullet handball, and we do that a lot, or handball too high or too low. I think this week we also didn't adjust, as was spoken about, we didn't adjust to those conditions later in the match. Temperature dropped, the ball became a little bit slicker. And big man, for you, is our handball game a little sloppy for your liking, like Nairobi Demon has observed?
It's tough for all teams. I mean, with the handballing, so much pressure on players in all games. And as I said, the interesting thing about it, going back to the pressure, was to be able to see, well, Hawks actually played better than I'd thought. And one of the interesting things for me, normally I watch the replay, and most of the things I've thought about during when I've watched it live, nothing really surprises me. But in terms of, I don't think, that's nothing major. However, this time watching the replay, I actually thought to myself, Hawthorn played a lot better on second viewing than they did, than I thought live at the ground. So that's a factor in terms of the pressure they put on was better than I thought, and so that's a factor in the handballs missing. The other thing I think with handballs is they look like they're experimenting still a bit with that structure of how do you get it outside the contest, keeping in mind that there's different directional for the handball. In that clip that Sanderson was talking about, he was talking about Frio's philosophy. That's where it started, and right before that on the show.
I don't think we haven't played that clip yet.
Sorry, that's coming out right at the beginning. Yeah, right. You'll hear this with the Longmuir being interviewed, and he was saying about their handballs is that they get the most metres gained of any team with handballs, so that it's an important part of the way they play. So I think there's an element of that we're practicing new ways of getting the ball from inside to outside, from the back half while still going forward. But I think you're right, and Nairobi Demon's right, is that it's very frustrating when they don't hit a target, isn't it? And the other thing, of course, is we've talked about they all seem to be going for those underground handballs now.
Yeah, but they're for the most part working. I don't often see that not coming off. But D-Minion says, anybody who has been doubting Charlie Spargo's importance to the team and whether or not he is best 22 can just sit down and take a seat. 2 goals. Welcome back, Charlie. Big man, I know you were baffled when Charlie wasn't selected for the Suns game. Were you happy to have him back this week?
Yeah, well, I put on Demonland that before that there was zero chance of him not playing, and I think I said the same on the podcast as well. And I put on Demonland that there was, sorry about that, I hope I wasn't out of line with the crack about there being zero chance of Spargs not being selected if fit, and took my medicine. However, I think in my defence, that my caveat was that he would be selected if not fit, and my assumption was because he got selected in the VFL team, he was fit, and it was a selection issue. However, on Simon Goodwin, our senior coach, on Tuesday, 10th of May, had his midweek presser, and he clearly indicated Mr. Spargo's non-selection in round 7 game against the Suns was in fact fitness related. In response to a question about Mr. Charles Spargo being in the twos and concussion, Simon said this: he basically had 2 weeks out of the game. Coming back from concussion, we know at times that can be quite challenging. And having 2 weeks out, we wanted to make sure he was 100% right. We brought him back via the VFL. He played incredibly well. He's an important player for us. Next week he gets selected. He's not coming out of the team.
Yeah, because we know when they have buys or whatever, they keep up the fitness. But I guess when you're on concussion protocols, you can't do some of that work. You have to be away from the club. So, yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting, actually, leaving aside my attempted humour there, but the notion of bringing him back in the VFL because of his concussion, and he had 2 weeks out of the game, but that it's somehow, perhaps less likely he's going to get a further concussion in the VFL, or that his mistakes aren't going to, if there are mistakes because of his concussion, or he's still a bit sloppy, they're not going to obviously hurt us as much.
Bigfoot, responding to the Charlie post, says, I'll add that anybody who claimed that Michael Hibberd was finished can join the Charlie Spargo naysayers. And many people have written off Hibbo year after year. He keeps on showing why he's best 22. And I think the only thing holding Pig back is his own body. Fully fit, he's excellent, but that calf and Achilles can ping at any time. But he was great on the weekend. What do you think, big man?
Well, I'm definitely one of the people guilty of perhaps not writing him off. That's maybe a bit strong, but not him being in our best 22 is maybe that's the same thing.
Well, then you can sit down.
But, so I'm definitely been guilty of that 100%. But he was awesome on the weekend, I thought. In fact, I thought he was our best player. His effort was brilliant, and he was a big factor in with Rivers and with McVie in winning the ground ball gets down back and addressing that concern for us. His will to compete is brilliant, and there were a couple of one-on-ones where he looked all the world like he was going to lose the marking contest and found a way to halve it, including one down on the wing down in the forward pocket on the members' side. It was just a fantastic bit of play. So he's in. Is it too much to say in career best form?
No. Look, he had a pretty good 2021.
It's going to be a real interesting when Salo gets back because, in answer to the question on Demonland, I had a back and forth with a poster about this very topic, and I was asked, well, who would come out and my answer was Hibberd. When Salem comes in, if McVie stays in, for instance, someone's got to come. If McVie stays in the back half, someone's going to come out from that back half. Although it's a 7-man back half. But Hibberd's going to be very difficult to have to be taken from that side. That's for sure.
Kiwi D says, congratulations to Stephen May on playing his 200th AFL game. He was immense on the weekend with his strong marking and spoiling, and I'll second that. Maisie was excellent on Saturday afternoon, evening. The marking, spoiling, everything. Congratulations, Stephen May, on 200 games.
200 games, and I forgot that it was 200 games and left before he chaired off. So there's a great interview, Andy, on the Melbourne website. I don't know if you've seen it. And I thought it'd be worth you looking at because he talks about many of the things really almost quote for quote what he said in your interview with him, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, there was one thing, something that he mentioned as well, that little story that all he wanted to do was go back home and tell everyone he played a game.
But also he mentioned what he mentioned to you about, well, what you asked him about actually. But he wasn't asked about this on the website. He talked about being a leader, an Aboriginal leader, which I thought was fantastic, particularly given it's a Doug Nichols round coming up this week.
I thought we had a question from someone, I can't see it here, about McVie, because I just want to give him props. I thought he was fantastic against he played mostly on Wingard. I thought Wingard had zero impact on the game, and that was McVie. And Wingard has given us some trouble, even when he was at Port as well, was always sort of one that gave us a little bit of trouble. So, just wanted to give him props for that. Mandalorian says, I really thought Trent Rivers had an exceptional game, possibly one of the best he's played for the club. The long-range goal was just superb. He should have license to have a ping whenever he's in that position. Again, I concur. He has got so many strings to his bow. He defends well. He runs off half back well. Demonland poster Lazy said, he seems to have a really good knack of knowing when to leave his man and present to make an option. And I guess that's what he did when he kicked that, that booming kick. He really roosted that from outside 50, and it went goal post high into the stands. Definitely one of his best games for the club. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. I reckon he'll be a 200+ gamer for us at the D's. I think he'll be loyal. He'll stay with us through the journey. Love him.
He's been so impressive this last 2-3 weeks. And if you haven't listened to his interview in the change rooms with, I'm not sure who the new interviewer is, but he doesn't enunciate very clearly. And 3 or 4 times I've heard players have to ask him to repeat the question, which happened a couple of times in this interview with Rivers. But nonetheless, it's a really interesting interview. And he talks about his fitness this year and how much fitter he came back from the postseason break, which seems to be a real theme, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, definitely. Singer says, fantastic podcast the last few weeks, guys. Keep up the hard work. The effort is very much appreciated by this overseas fan. After watching every single game on the Watch AFL app, I was fortunate enough to travel back home last week and got to see the Ds in person for the first time in nearly 4 years. A couple of things I noticed about our wingers. Hunter is very physical. A number of times when he was corralling a player who would then give off a handball, he always made sure to give them a nice bump just to let them know he was there. I like this type of physicality. It's not thuggish and lets the opponent know psychologically that there are no cheap handballs, you have to earn it. Because I was sitting behind the goals, I noticed that Ed Langdon would often be the extra player dropping back into defence, and because of his pace and endurance, would often get back there before some of the defenders joining our sweeper, usually May, to set up before everyone got back, making sure he could cover any errant opposition forward that got loose. I've seen both Hunter and Langdon get criticism this year for being off their games, but I think we are playing our wingers differently this season now that we have two genuine wingmen. Hunter is playing offensively on his wing and Langer's playing more defensively on his wing. What are the panel's thoughts? And I also noticed Langdon, from where I was sitting, getting back to help out the defenders. And as Singer said, he was often getting back there early. And then even if the ball didn't end up there, and was turned over further up the field back to our forward line, he always turned tail and he ran back up the field to be in a position up the ground where needed. And having Hunter in the side as a great distributor of the ball going forward has allowed us to play Ed in this manner and not always relying on going through Ed Langdon as that, we said last year was becoming predictable. Hunter is incredibly important to the way we set up too. He's always around the ground. He's always at the around the ground stoppages, ready to receive the ball, and he's involved in a lot of our thrusts forward. And as we know, he's got fantastic disposal. And I, for the life of me, can't believe some of the criticism that he's getting online. Big man, you won't believe. Last week I saw a comment on Facebook calling for him to be dropped. It baffles me.
I'm going to have to add Langers to my Nibbler and Spargo.
No, that was Hunter. Someone was calling for Hunter to be dropped. But I've seen Langdon people
Hunter dropped.
Yeah.
Well, you drop, probably, to be honest, you drop Lang. Not that you drop either, but Hunter's been, I would say statistically ahead of Langers. No, that's just crazy talk, isn't it? So, I guess being a Melbourne fan doesn't necessarily protect you against crazy talk but I think it's the Singer's comments there are another good example of what I meant about some of the really terrific analysis on Demonland, and I think he's spot on. And I made that same comment 2 or 3 weeks ago in the podcast that I was really surprised how physical Hunter is. I'm not sure what, I guess because I don't watch the Dogs that often before him coming to Melbourne, and always disliked Hunter until he came to Melbourne.
Did you notice him giving a couple of bumps every time? His opponents gave off the ball?
He's been doing that all season. And they all do. Cozzy does it as well, is that it must be a team rule. I'm not sure if he's done that previously.
Yeah, just let them know you're there.
Yeah, exactly. And he's incredibly hard to bring to ground. That's the other ace in his pack. Definitely the other interesting thing is, in terms of Langers, is that I read a comment on Demonland calling for Langdon to be dropped.
Wow.
That he's unaccountable and that he's, defensively poor and, clearly something's up with him and, he needs to spell it Casey. So that's why I thought you were meaning him before. But, I think that what's interesting is that, we're still playing lanes. We're not a huge team that crosses much. We still, we will cross one lane and then go forward. We still more often than not go down the single lane. But what's different is that from full back and when we're coming out from our back half, we're not exclusively going down Langdon's wing anymore. We're equally likely to go to Hunter's wing. So that's logic would suggest that's going to impact on Langer's game. He's seeing less of the footy, obviously, isn't he? So the critical thing about Langdon and Hunter, but when Langdon's not getting the ball, is what you had mentioned and what Singer mentioned, is that his defensive run is just phenomenal. When you really get a handle on that, when you're up top, on the Ponsford or the other end, looking straight down, because his running is phenomenal, but it doesn't really. it's hard to see the impact of it, because if nothing happens, if the ball doesn't kick to him, it's like the absence of nothing. Do you know what I mean? If it doesn't get kicked to him or his opponent because of the sheer ability to run and to block a easy chip pass, then it goes to the other wing and he doesn't get the footy. It's that sort of commitment to all-team defence and playing your role, even if that means it's going to impact negatively on your own statistics. And I think he's in that boat now, Langers. Hunter's been a fantastic, absolutely brilliant recruit, I reckon.
Lazy says, or asks, are we sticking enough tackles outside our 50 at the moment? There were a few moments where the likes of Day, Nash and Newcomb started dashing through the middle or the wing, and our player would make contact but couldn't wrap them up. They would slip out of the tackle and get away. We currently rank first for tackles inside 50, but 12th for overall tackles. Interested to hear your thoughts. Well, I guess along with our handballing, another common gripe of mine is our inability to stick tackles. I feel teams are able to break out of our tackles a bit too easily against us. I never know. Well, look, I watch other games, but I guess I'm not watching for that in particular, so I guess I don't notice that from other teams, as I'm not looking too intently at that when I watch other games. B-Man, is this an issue for the Ds? Or is it just hard to stick tackles?
It's super frustrating, isn't it, at the footy when they don't take someone, when someone does break through a tackle. The really key stat there, I guess, is the number one in the AFL for tackles inside 50, because if my memory serves me, was 17th or 18th or 16th, like at this same time last year for that stat. There was a huge amount of criticism that Melbourne were copping at that point, despite not having lost the game, for our inside 50 pressure.
Because it was
they've really sorted.
It was a hallmark of the game in 2021, and then last year it dropped off.
Exactly.
So we've got that back.
Exactly. It was probably the biggest, wasn't it? It was probably the biggest statistical difference between the two seasons, 22 and 21. So that's impressive. 12 mid-table, I'm not sure how big an issue it is, but it's certainly frustrating when sort of thinking about that question. I do wonder whether our game plan, like Collingwood's, is incredibly based on running, and not just sort of running when you've got the footy, running in waves 3, 4, 5 times. So I think that means that you're going to have a lot of players at any given point in time really, really fatigued. And when you're fatigued, it's going to be harder to stick a tackle. Compared to Carlton, who are a really good tackling team, and I don't have it in front of me, but they'd be, I suspect, pretty high up on the tackle numbers. But they don't do anywhere near the same amount of running that we do, so therefore aren't going to be as fatigued across the board in the game, and that's got to mean that they're more able to physically be able to tackle, because they're not, at any given point, they're not as fatigued as we're likely to be because the amount of extra running that we're doing.
We've got a question from Weber, and it's about Harry Petty, but might be a bit of a moot point discussing this, but I'll read it anyway. Looking forward to this pod, boys. This is from Weber. Cheeky question for Bim-Man. Given Harry Petty's excellent showing before being subbed out on Saturday, his continuing presence in the forward line, and Goody's clear intentions from his post-match presser, is Bim-Man prepared to accept that Pets will be a forward going forward, David Neitz 2.0, as I've been predicting since 2019, and not be shuffled back to defence as an expression of our best team? 2021 is 2 years ago. Things evolve. Excellent potting, boys, and only getting better. In regards to Petty, B-Man, are you prepared to accept that Petty will be a forward going forward? Well, not for the next 4 to 6 weeks, but...
Well, I was right. He won't be playing forward this week, so that's a tick in my column. Funnily enough, during the week, there was a post I put up about this very topic, and saying that I think that he will, even though Goody had said that he's, for the next few weeks they're going to trial him up forward or keep that trial going. My comment was that I suspect that after that, ultimately they'll be looking to move him back as into defence. That it's they're looking to maybe give Petty and give T-Mac and BB some time to get their fitness to an optimal level, and that was my sense. And in response, Demonland posted a bit of Optimistic wrote, seems odd, Ben. I reckon Petty took more marks in that half he played than any other forward this year, and the game just gone.
Well, he took 6 marks, I think, in the first half. So
right.
in less than that.
And so, about 5 minutes later, after reading that post on Demonland, I happened to watch Goody's midweek presser, and he was pretty clear he's staying up forward for, obviously the injury it wasn't clear then yet, although they would have known that Goody was pretty clear in that presser that he was staying up there for the foreseeable future. Personally, I still think he'll go back. However, there's a really fantastic question coming up from D4.
We'll get to that soon.
Which, maybe I'll pick that up again. So, I'm prepared to concede that maybe he will go forward. Who knows? Maybe he'll be the old-fashioned swingman, go forward and go back, and that hasn't been trialled that much. I mean, T-Mac has done it. It doesn't happen that often, footy really these days, does it? It used to happen a lot in the 70s and 80s.
Well, who knows what could happen in this game? He was 6 marks, 2 goals. He was looking at getting a bag, maybe 4 goals, 5 maybe, if he'd kept playing and taking an absolute bucket load of marks. But, we'll never know now. Casey had the bye and did not play, so there's nothing to report on that front. Training, Demonland track watcher Kev Martin ventured down to Gosh's paddock to bring us the following training from Monday's session. That was this morning. Music beats start up. They players mingle with the trainers and coaches and doing a few dinky passes. Coaches separate, whistle blows and they gather. Track is with them. No sign of Petty. Well, we know why now. Light duties, track, Viney, Lever, Fritter, Hibbo, Betty Brown. Then they joined in some skilled drills. Rehab was T-Mac, Tomlinson, Spargo. They're in rehab tops and wearing runners. They've joined in the skills drills taken by Williams. Plenty of short kicking, which involve looking at the target, then the ball. Look at the target, then the ball is Choco's advice. Plenty of goal kicking practice under supervision. And then that was it. No sign of harms, which is a bit of a worry considering he missed some time for personal reasons. I wonder if that's also part of that. When asked how...
just to clarify, so training was harmless?
Yes, it was. Thanks for that, Dad. We need one dad joke a week, and there's your quota. When asked how track was looking, Kev replied, looking good, unhampered. And we've since learned that track... this was the injury report said he has to get through all of training this week, and if he does, he'll play. Yeah, so he's a test. When asked, is Joel Smith out there looking as though he might be needed? Kev replied, training well, kicking goals and working on his process. Kev added that Salem was very comfortable and appeared happy to be out there. Of course he would, you would think. So let's get into...
Just before you do, and it'd be remiss of both of us not to at least comment on how fantastic track was in the football, in particularly the first half. I mean, what a beast. When he turns it on, he's something else, isn't he?
Yeah, he's amazing. He's taken his game to the even if there was a next level. It's just it's not a pity because I love having both Oliver and Petracca, but the two of them are going to cost the two of them a Brownlow medal, which is unfortunate. It's an individual award. I'd love a Melbourne player to get it, but they're going to cost each other because,
And I think Singer's point about Oliver also applies to track, because if he's not doing 80% mid-time like he was last season, and he's, he can push forward, for instance, or he's spending more time on the bench, so that means when he's on the field, he's such a power athlete. So you want him at full power as often as possible, rotating more players through the midfield and some of that experimenting. That's the payoff, isn't it? But he's just... I can't recall ever watching a footballer who's so hard to take to ground or to stop either getting a handball or kickoff. One of the shots at goal he had no right to. It ended up missing. It would have been one of the goals of the year, but he had no right to be able to get the ball to boot. But it just happened so regularly. And the other thing that potentially this is partly his basketball background. He reads the ball on intercepts so well in tight contests, and that's something Oliver does as well. So he's already taking a half step towards where the ball is going to be. And, sometimes it looks like luck, but he's just puts himself in the right place because he's got that split second time, he's split second quicker thinking than opponents knowing where the ball's going to be. And just the other one was Viney. Viney is having I think his best season.
I thought he was one of our best. He's the guy on the bottom of every single pack, just bullocking through. Doesn't do the fancy stuff, but without him, we're getting absolutely, people complain we're getting beaten in clearances. Without him, we're getting even beaten by even more.
And I mean, clearances again. There was more data on that, how useless that sort of clearance number is just by itself. Is the Tigers in that first quarter, they were something crazy like 10 clearances down after one quarter of footy, yet they were 3 goals up, albeit the Cats missed quite a few shots, but nonetheless they were 3 goals up despite losing clearances by 10. They're a club that never have worried about clearances. It's all post-clearance possession, contested possession.
Big man, you would have lost me again. I've marked the time. That's me. It's. I don't know what's wrong with my internet. I can see the stream cut. You stopped. It cut. We'll move on. The changes. Monocular says, once again, many thanks for your entertaining and informative podcast, which I look forward to every week. Our taller/tallish key position players continue to tantalise and confuse. Clearly, May and Lever are our 2 primary defenders, but who, if any, is the third? Petty probably is the best, but he's needed up forward now for at least now and provided a great contest in the first half today. Disco, ? Tomlinson, ? Adams presumably is at least a year away, but is he showing signs at Casey, ? Do we need to pinch another developed tall defender in the trade period? D for Life also wants to talk about defence. How many teams have 3 genuine forward talls? The Demons' greatest defensive challenge last year was the ball coming in fast and hitting the ground. So the Demons have gone extra mid-size in defence versus third tall to help with the ball hitting the ground. Look at the other teams in the mix. Pies, McStay and Mychek, Cats, Hawkins and Camerons, Lions, Danaher and Hipwood, Doggies, Ugelhagen and Norton, maybe Lobb, Saints, King and Membry, Tigers, Lynch and Rewalt, Carlton, Curnow and McKay, Port, Dixon and Finlayson. And he's got question mark, but that's probably that Marshall guy who's incidentally out this week. Dogs and maybe Port can go 3 talls, but if you go big, if oppositions knock it to the ground with great discipline, they are off to the races. I feel this is how the Pies defend. So May/Lever with Hibbo/Rivers taking the third tall, with Max/Grundy also providing some cover. It leaves Bowie, McVie, Brayshaw, Salem to cover the small mid-sized players. Goodwin and footy department have learned from last year and are modifying our team structure to suit what is required to be in the hunt in 2023. While earlier in the year I thought Petty would go back, but on reflection above, with how few teams have 3 decent tall forwards and Petty on the way to a breakout game yesterday, I feel we might stick with a smaller defence. Your thoughts, gentlemen, re smaller defence and Petty staying as a forward. And Big Man are 2 backs sufficient at the moment, with Goodwin confirming that Petty is going to remain forward and injury now forcing him out for 4 to 6 weeks. Who's the next cap off the rank in defence? We've got Dixon and Finlayson, the Port's 2 main forwards options. Do we need a third tall this week and perhaps against some of the other teams?
Oh, it's really, really interesting question, that one, because, as you know, I've been firmly of the belief that we need 3 talls and that we'll go to a 3 tall defensive setup. But that's a really persuasive argument, I think. And, I think particularly the sort of notion of how we're going to respond to Collingwood and their fast ball movement, because the challenge for us last year, and, for every team, this is not a Melbourne-specific challenge, but is, our 3 tall, 1 lockdown and intercepting is really at its best when we can slow the ball movement right down. But when teams, and that seems, that's most of the teams are playing fast as they can off halfback flank, logic suggests that's going to make it much more difficult to to get that right. So I think that's a really, really interesting question, actually. And I think, I can really see what D4 is saying there. And I think that's a strong argument that, which would say Petty staying forward, wouldn't it? Because if you don't need the tall break glass, you bring him back. So I think there's a lot of merit in that. I didn't think that in the last few weeks I've been really sort of clear in my mind, at least, that we'll go to that 3 tall. But, as I say, I think that's a really persuasive argument. And these are the clips. I muddled up my clips in my head before. So it got me thinking about the defensive philosophy of Goody and our defensive system. And as I noted before, I really feel like Goody's designing, right in front of us, a new defensive system specifically to counter the model that Pies are playing, which I personally don't think is radically different. It's framed often like it is, but I think it's a very similar game plan to ours, but with some key differences. And so we've got a couple of clips that sort of speak to philosophy of coaching. And so if you can play the first one, Andy, and then come back, and then there's a second clip.
What do you hear strategically in Justin Longmuir?
Well, I really do rate Longmuir. I know he's very young in his coaching caper, but his philosophy is defence and setting up a front half turnover game where every time you take the ball inside your forward 50 and the opposition try and bring it out, that you play the game in your front half on the back of sort of fierce forward half pressure. They're not getting that at the moment. We talked about it last week about the ability for a coach. You have your beliefs, you have a philosophy, and every coach across community level, AFL level, junior level, every coach has in their mind a way that the game should be played. And you would have one too, Jared. You would be really strong in the way that you feel like if you were coaching, this is the style that I would implement. The challenge is the game continues to evolve, and there's always trends which start to come into the competition. There's a difference between having a philosophy, but also to being stubborn in an approach which is not working.
So that was about Freo, specifically about their sort of travail, and that was for this. Things are looking much better for Freo, unfortunately for these fans. But I thought it was a really interesting discussion about the philosophy of coaching. And, there's another element for me about coaching that we've talked about before, and maybe we'll talk about again at some point this season, which is the system and how much you rely, how system focused you are. And I think there's a scale of that. But just on that philosophy of defense versus offense, if there was a scale, and on the defensive end you had Roos and Malthouse, for instance, and on the offensive end of the scale you had Malcolm Blight, McRae would be towards the Malcolm Blight end of it in terms of his philosophy. Collingwood play really aggressively off that defence, as noted in the question from D4. They push up high, those running numbers. They don't have the goalkeeper out the back in the same way that we do. And so I think personally think it's a really big risk, that, defensive problem that they've got in a grand final, for instance, because it's exactly what happened in that Geelong game. They can get hurt out the back, I think, but that's part of their risk reward. So on that risk reward dial, they've got it, McRae's got it slightly towards the reward side of that. And that's why everyone loves watching Collingwood. They are terrific to watch. Goody is like Longmuir. I think they're very similar coaches philosophically, and he's much more on the defensive side of it. So, part of the challenge, and it touches on D4's question, which is why it was such a good sort of question in terms of these quotes, is finding a way to be offensive, which we are. So, defense is an element of being a good in attack, always has been for Melbourne, but in critically being able to defend against fast ball movement. And I think it's a work in progress at the moment, which is why Goody was so keen to go directly to where we were on our defence. And if you could play that Goody clip now, Andy.
Has the defensive stability been a bit of a focus, I suppose, after the Essendon role in particular, that you've just tried to make sure you get that part of your game down?
Yeah, we have. The last month or so of footy, we've really honed in on our defensive actions. We want to be a really strong defensive team. That's, what we feel is the hallmark of great teams, and it gives you the best opportunities. So we've refined a bit of that, tightened up in a few areas, and again in the first half today, I thought we were incredibly disciplined with how we played. We made every possession really tough for Hawthorn, and we got our rewards on the scoreboard.
Thanks, Andy. So I just think that's a really important distinction between him and McRae. Is that if that same question was asked of McRae, he likes to emphasise the flair. Of course, defence is important to all coaches, so it's not like defence isn't something that is in their mind, and they've improved heaps. Their defence has improved heaps, and they've got some really excellent players back there, led by Moore, who's just a really terrific footballer. But so when we play them and when we come up against them, the King's Birthday and potentially in finals, it's two philosophies head to head essentially. And so I loved Goody's comments that he thinks. We think, in fact, he said that, which was interesting. We think, meaning the whole club, is that good defence is a hallmark of great teams, and so it really, can't wait for that contest with the Pies of those two different philosophies. And I personally agree. I mean, history is a good guide in this, and defence wins most world team sports. You still need to score. It's that tension between the two, and I'm really loving watching Goody, right in front of us, as I said, sort of experiment with a new defensive system, and maybe Petty up forward and the two talls is key to that. And it does mean that it exposes us to the ground ball. There's more space in the defensive area. It's less congested because the ball movement's quicker. So it does need to be different, and we are needing to be attacking more. But at the heart of the way Goody thinks about footy, it's defence first.
Well, from defence to offence, Monocular looks at our forwards and says, the recently liberated JVR is developing beautifully but slowly, as one would expect of anyone in his role, and it is a hell of a lot to ask him to be the key yet. Petty showed great signs before injury today and looked like a breakout was coming. Sadly, I doubt if we see either Ben Brown or T-Mac near their best again due to chronic injuries. Jefferson, like Adams in defence, looks at least a year or two away. Grundy and Max fit him well, but is this sustainable as a preferred option? How about Joel Smith, if he can keep his body together? And of course, our 6-goal grand final premiership forward Petracca plays as a sort of tall, but has been down on touch in recent games. Interested in your thoughts on these key areas, both short-term and medium-term. So, B-Man, we have Petty missing for possibly 4 to 6 weeks with a foot complaint. Who's the next cab off the rank up forward? After kicking 3 goals in the twos against the Suns 2 weeks ago, Ben Brown wasn't selected as the emergency this past week, despite the prospect that JVR might have been suspended. T-Mac was given the honours, and that was despite him missing with injury for the Casey match against the Suns. Neither played this week, as Casey had the bye. Someone's coming. We're talking changes now, so Petty's out. Which tall forward's coming in? Or is it B Brown? Is it T-Mac? Or is it someone like Joel Smith?
Or Shaki. I mean,
Shaki. I forgot about Shaki.
I mean, Shaki was the last man off the ranks.
That's true. He was. You're right.
And Goody often does that, doesn't he? He's like last in, last out. Personally, I'd love to see Smith. I've always thought that's his best position up forward. I know he's a player who divides opinion, but I really love the way he plays footy. For me, down back exposes his weaknesses, which is his questionable footy IQ at times, and also his sort of defensive weakness. And sometimes he's sort of, he's Frosty-like decision making.
He's playing forward. He's been training as a forward.
He's been training as forward. So for me, it's a bit like that philosophy that Goody's talked about as well, about making sure, and this is all coaches do this, is taking advantage of players' strengths and playing them in the position where they can best use their strengths. And for me, that's up forward. As you say, he's been training there. But he can be free up forward just to attack the footy. He doesn't have to think about where he is in terms of his opponent all the time. He doesn't have to think about, if I make a mistake here, I'll give up a goal. He can be free, attack the ball, but his combination of skill, his athleticism, he's really quick off the mark, which is super important, increasingly so in footy. He's got, as we know, fantastic leap. He's got good hands as well, and he's really reliable set shot. So for me, I hope that he comes in, and I could actually see him playing in that. It's a real pity. It's obviously awful for Petty. I just found out that earlier, so it's a shock for him. It's for a fellow who seems to be injured every week. It's like finally he's got one that's going to keep him out for a while. But Shacky's got a good case to come in too. Who they bring in, I hope they bring Smith in, because I'd like to see him 4 or 5 weeks during this period. I'm concerned about BB. There was a press conference, I think the same one that I was talking about before, when they were talking about Petty as a forward, as when Goody was talking about Petty as a forward, that seemed to indicate that BB, the implication was that Ben Brown is a fair way off being in optimal shape.
And he wasn't, as I said, he wasn't the guy to come in if JVR didn't get through the court case.
And to be
T-Mac
honest,
was emergency.
Well, and the implication seemed to be from Goody that they'll be looking for Ben Brown on the other side of the bye. Almost feels like a mini preseason again, which they've done with him once before. They did that in 21, didn't they? So, which is a concern that he's ways off. And to be honest, I don't reckon T-Mac looks like he's in optimal shape. He hasn't all season, and he had obviously the Lisfranc injury, which must impact his running to some extent, and his ability to put miles on the clock, so to speak. So it's a bit of a concern. I think. We've got coverage. We've got Smith and we've got Shacky. I hope they bring in Smith. Goody loves him. He's divides opinion a bit, but we'll see. But Shacky equally, I wouldn't be unhappy if they bring him in. He deserves his shot as well when he got selected previously, although it's probably worth noting that Smith wasn't ready at that point to be selected.
Sydney Demon says, thank you for your continuing excellent work on the podcast, Andy, George and B-Man. Essential listening for the dedicated Demons fan. I'm interested in getting your views on how and where Salem is going to be slotted into the side after he completes his conditioning playing for Casey. Also, your thoughts on JJ's game as a sub against Hawthorn and his position in the side for the remainder of the season. Similarly, do you think there's a role for James Harms going forward? And if not, do you see the merit of him being traded out a year ahead of free agency, or should we keep him as depth? I think Casey having the bye the last week really worked against us, particularly in terms of getting another game under the belts of T-Mac and Ben Brown, and most certainly did not come at a good time for Salem. I can't see us playing Salem Raw this week in a massive match against Port. Perhaps he gets a game against the Dockers, maybe next week against the Blues. JJ will be thanking the MRO because he'll no doubt replace Sparrow. And then I guess Harms maybe replaces him as the sub, although as we mentioned, Kev's training report said Harms wasn't there, so I hope it's nothing serious and Harmsy isn't taking more time off. Bin-Man, Salem and JJ?
Well, on Salem, 2 weeks ago, again, an inference, but Goody seemed to imply that Salem wasn't going to come back till after the bye either. And then he was asked about Salem in the presser, and he was specifically asked, will he be playing this week? And
he sort of said, but no.
Could be,
but no. But probably go 3
I'm
Ks.
leaning towards the VFL, which is just, why don't you just say no?
So, he's playing VFL this week.
And I don't think he'll come back in the following week. Depends. Maybe he's suddenly got he's fitter, but he's done all the running, according to Goody and others at the club. You would think after this layoff that he'd want at least 2. They'd want him to play at least 2 VFL games, wouldn't you? But ultimately, I see him slotting back into exactly the role that he played with Bowie and him on, basically playing the same role on either halfback flank, allowing McVie to go back and play that lockdown defender role that he did so well against Wingard, which is a big gap for us. So that, to me, that's a really good setup.
And then like Rivers and Hibberd sort of taking the third tall-ish or the medium/tall.
Yeah, and Hibberd. I mean, like I've heard Steve May say, there's no back six anymore. It's a back seven, and then you can have players like Gus, Hibberd, Rivers, not so much Bowie, but maybe to a lesser extent Salem, sort of rotating coming off, maybe playing a bit of midfield time and some half back, half forward. It's a real. It's frustrating that we're not going to have Sparrow this week. That's a huge out. When are we appealing? Or we've been to the well once.
I think we've been pushing it.
So it's a big out for this week because again he plays such an important role. JJ, you're right. He'll come back in. Harms, for me, Harms and around the best 24 at the moment, best 23. Harms and JJ, unfortunately for both of them, are the two players for mine that are on the bubble that are going to probably be pushed out when you get a player like Salem coming back in.
Well, let's get into the preview versus Port, the D's and the Power. Actually, I should make mention it's Naarm actually this week. Naarm versus Yatapulti. Port's also changing their name for the Sir Doug Nicholls round, and which I think is a fantastic initiative that the D's started up last year. It's great that we're doing this and recognising the Indigenous culture and the Indigenous history and the impact that Indigenous players have had on our great game. So, yeah, well done to the MFC for being trailblazers in that regard, because I think Freo are also changing their name. So that's three clubs at least, and that's fantastic. And I also love the Indigenous Guernsey that will be playing in this week. Not sure if you've seen that, Bin Man. I saw a few people.
I bought one.
Oh, you bought one. I saw a few people wearing it.
Long sleeve, the dark blue one. And is it Lau? Who's the artist?
I'm not sure.
But yeah, it's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. I think my favourite design.
Yep.
They've all been terrific. But
I love the gradient of the red. Just blends into the rest of the jumper. It's really nice.
Yeah, fantastic. So, yeah, I bought that. I think we wear it 3 times because we also wear it in the Alice Springs.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
It looks fantastic. So, Sparrow's a huge out this week, I think, for us.
Okay. The D's and the Power on level pegging with each other, 7 wins, 2 losses. The Power have won their last 6 games in a row. Only percentage separates the two teams at the moment, but this match on the big stage on Friday night is really a true 8-point match in the context of this season. Big Man, what are the key matchups that you see playing out?
Well, just on Port, I think they're...
Oh, yeah, you did want to talk about Port first, yeah.
Just really quickly, I think they're in much better shape this year. They've made some big differences. That's interesting. Wine's not playing nearly as much midfield time. They've got Rosie in there, Butters in there. There's some interesting stats for stats lovers in terms of people who criticise rucks because they're where is it? I had it here. They're 17th in hit-outs per game, yet they're 4th in clearances per game. So that's a pretty impressive clearance number, isn't it, given that they can barely get a hit-out. So
that just means they're good at sharking the opposition. So
they're 5th in points per game, so they've been really strong offensively. Where they've really improved, I think, this season is their defence is a lot better, and their pressure's been terrific. They're number 1 in the AFL for tackles. So they're much stronger defensively. I think that they're not relying so much on that fast ball movement off the halfback flank. I think he's done a good job this year of being more sort of consistent. I think that's a knock for Port. For me, they've always struck me as an emotion-driven side. Last week's game isn't much value in looking at in terms of what they played North, so it's not much value in terms of looking at those stats. I went back to the previous game, which was their home game against the Bombers, and their numbers, not dissimilar to ours in some of them. They won the contested possession by 17, which is something they really need to do against us. in that game against the Bombers, and they smashed them by 400 metres in metres gained. They're playing a lot more forward, half footy, a lot more basically like the D's in Richmond, that sort of model. And, I would put Collingwood in the same space. Everyone loves the way that they move the ball, but it's not a million miles away from the same philosophy. So I think they've really, really improved. That midfield will be critical, but surely we'll have an advantage with our two rucks, coming up against them this week. So
they have Marshall has concussions, so he's out. He's one of their rucks.
And Rioli's out for them.
Out.
So that's a big out for us. One, because it's he's a good player who can kick goals, but two, it's a player who's not going to expose our weakness on ground balls up forward. So I think that's an important out. As always is the case against Port, Charlie Dixon, it's really important to be able to lock him down, but they're relying on him much less this season.
Finlayson's sort of more prolific than he's been this season.
Yeah. And they're not going to Dixon as much. Finlayson's been fantastic pickup for them, a really, really brilliant pickup for them. Just looking at some of their differentials, they're 2.3 more contested marks than the opposition this year. So that's something that's going to be important for us to impact and make sure that we can bring the ball to ground, which, to be honest, that's another problem with Petty being out, because he could have played a defensive forward role on Aliir, who's such a critical player for them.
My D's asked the question, assuming Petty plays, is there a role for him as a defensive forward on Aliir? So that's a moot point, that question now. Was obviously asked.
Yeah, it's a moot point that Petty, but we're going to have to find a way to do it. And I think it is in that same question you could bring Melksham in to play that role. That's the role he's played. So that's the other wild card from selection. But he is such an important player for, one from their obviously defensive, but also, springboarding attack. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do in that space to limit his impact. Defensive forward, Goody uses that role quite often. They're getting the ball inside 50 3.5 times, and nearly 3.5 times more than the opposition so far this season, which is sort of indicative of what I was saying about them being much more forward half footy this year. And albeit they're only 14th in metres gained per game, so that suggests they're not right up there with us in the cutting edge around that. They a huge challenge, bigger challenge than I think they were last year. They've sorted out some of their defensive weaknesses. Their midfield is looking a lot stronger, but they're going to coming up against our midfield. They do like to still move the ball quick, not as quick as the Pies. That'll test us and test our defensive system that I was talking before. And of course, they're playing at home on a Friday night in front of their home crowd. I don't know, but what's the weather? Have you checked the weather?
I haven't, and I was thinking about that. So just vamp while I bring that up.
So,
I think I deleted Adelaide.
A huge challenge. We're on the book betting markets. We're $1.68 favourites. So, if you'd ask your average D's fan who's favourite for this game, I reckon many would pick the Port would be favourites. But it's a challenge for us. But we've played well against Port. We travel well, and we like the Adelaide Oval. So we've got a lot of things for us going into this game. Petty's a big out and Sparrow's a big out. So they're two big outs coming into to this game. And of course, as I mentioned, a 6-day break.
So it's going to be cold. It's 16 degrees. That's during the day. Sun and clouds sort of in the morning, mostly cloudy for the rest of the day. At about 5:30, it got some rain, but then clear for the rest of the night, sort of cloudy for the rest of the night. So let me see if they have the precipitation.
We need to check the dew and humidity.
Well, I don't think there'll be much humidity if it's 16 degrees. It's like a millimetre of rain, less than a millimetre of rain when it sort of rains at about between 5 and 6. So, it won't be drenched, but it's be a cool night.
The one thing that's worth noting is that whilst I said that we're coming off a 6-day break, so are they, and they travelled down to Tasmania during the week, the last round. So that levels it up a little bit in terms of the impact of the travel. Impact of the break.
So Charlie Dixon was out with a quad sort of strain, but I'm sure they were just resting him against North to bring him back this week, assuming he plays. Who's going on? May's taking Dixon and
You'd think so.
Lever.
Stevie May will get him. Yeah.
Is Lever.
Marshall's a big out for them.
It is. He would have stretched us if you put that third. If he's resting down forward, we'd need another tall down there.
Yeah. And just on that third tour, it was interesting, take D4's point, but I can't remember if he listed Essendon in that list, but Essendon...
He did not, but they
specifically
stretched us.
tried to exploit our talls down back by having their 3 talls and the resting ruckman. And
well, Hinckley's a smart guy. I'm sure he'll be thinking about stuff like that, and I'm sure he'll look at the Essendon game to see what they did.
Yeah, so May is the perfect. In fact, who else would be able to take him? Who else has the strength to go up against Dixon? Who I think he's a much more dangerous player, Dixon, when they don't make him the number one player, the number one target. So, but Marshall has been terrific this season, and so they'll really miss him. He takes his chances, and he's really good on the lead. He's really important to the way they enter 50, and his leading patterns are really strong. So, and again, Brioli out is a big one for them as well.
All right, anything else about that game?
No, I'm looking forward to it. It's a Friday night game. It's a great one to have if we win. It's not so great if you lose, because we might actually get some media coverage the next day because there's nothing else to talk about it. Once the 12 o'clock footy shows start on the radio, they actually might, talk about the Demons. So looking forward to it, and hopefully we get a win. My prediction is we will win, and I think we're really set for this with a mindset of, what I was saying before, that this is the end of our really tough travel schedule. And I'm sort of thinking back to Selwyn Griffiths' comments about the planning around all of this. So let's hope the 6-day break doesn't take the juice out of us, and that, as is always the case, we'll know 10 minutes in, won't we, where we're at in terms of that. So that first 10 minutes of footy, I'll be looking for the pressure rating if it comes up on Fox to be up around that 200.
Well, you won't see that pressure rating. Do they do that?
It's
on 7, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, as I said, on the Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. If you want to listen to the show live, please join us at demonland.com on Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, G. Marrows and Luann. Thank you to our voicemailer, who was anonymous. So if you do leave a voicemail, you don't have to use your real name. Make up a name if you're on Demonland. A nom de plume. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Pew Pew Pew, Red Jacket, Denox, Von, Nairobi Demon, D-Minion, Bigfoot, Kiwi D, Mandalorian, Singer, Lazy, Weber, Monocular, D for Life, Sydney Demon, Oh My D's, and Kev Martin for his training report. Thank you to my co-host Binman. Thank you to you, our loyal listener, or listeners. I would hope there's more than just one of you guys out there. And don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and comment on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app, and we'll read it out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons.